One night in December 1994, a man was driving his car through the jungles of Port Elizabeth around 2 a.m. As he began to approach the highway through the forested area, he encountered a bizarre sight. A zombie-like figure standing in the middle of the road. Instantly, fear gripped him. Initially, he wanted to drive away immediately, but as he cautiously moved his car closer to the figure, his eyes widened in disbelief at the unbelievable scene before him. This video is intended for a mature audience. If you do not fall into this category, please stop watching now. Additionally, you will find a like button below this video. Please press it, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. To fully understand this incident, we need to go back to Port Elizabeth, South Africa on September 22nd, 1967. On this date, Alison Botha was born. The household she was born into was fraught with difficulties. Her parents were constantly at odds, and shortly after Alison's birth, her parents' conflicts escalated. Eventually, Alison's parents separated, and her mother gained custody of both Alison and her older brother, who was 18 months her senior. Alison's mother struggled but managed to provide an education and a decent life for her children. Despite not excelling academically, both Alison and her brother attended good schools and passed their classes. Over time, life progressed steadily for the family. Now let's delve a bit deeper into the city where Alison and her family lived. Port Elizabeth is home to approximately 900,000 people. It has earned the reputation of being the safest city in South Africa. On December 18, 1994, Alison Botha was 27 years old. By this time, she had completed her studies and was working successfully as an insurance broker, earning a good income. December 18th was a Sunday. Early that morning, Alison decided to call her friends from the landline to suggest a day out. They all agreed to spend the day at the beach. The friends met up, including Alison, and headed to the beach together. They enjoyed the entire afternoon and evening, making the most of their time together by the sea. They spent their time on the beach and had fun. By the evening, they decided it was time to head home as the day was drawing to a close. They got back in the car and drove to Alison's apartment. Once inside, they began eating and drinking, enjoying each other's company. Gradually, one by one, Alison's friends left. By 1 a.m., Alison's friend Kim was ready to go home and asked Alison if she could drop her off. Alison agreed, and they both left the apartment. Alison locked her door, and they went downstairs to the car. Alison drove Kim to her house and dropped her off. As Alison returned to her apartment to park her car, she noticed someone sitting in the passenger seat, staring at her from outside the car. Fear gripped her as she turned off the car, wondering who this person was and why he was there. He didn't seem to be from their building. Before Alison could comprehend the situation, the man ran from the passenger side to the driver's side, opened the door, grabbed Alison by the throat, and pulled out a knife, threatening her. The man ordered Alison to move to the passenger seat. Helpless, Alison complied, and the man took the driver's seat. He started the car, backed out of the parking spot, and drove onto the road. As he drove, he told Alison he had no intention of hurting her and that he just needed to use her car for an hour. After that, he said she would be free to go. Realizing the danger she was in, Alison decided to engage him in conversation, hoping it might help her survive. She knew that he had a weapon and could harm her at any moment. Desperately, Alison told the man that her boyfriend was waiting for her at home and that if she didn't return on time, she would be in serious trouble. Alison told the man her name was Suzanne, a false name she quickly thought of, which was a smart move under the circumstances. During their conversation, the man revealed his name was Clinton. As Alison and Clinton continued talking, the car eventually stopped at the side of the road. They remained there for about 3 minutes. Alison repeatedly pleaded with Clinton to let her go, promising she wouldn't inform the police and that he could keep her car. After a few minutes, the rear door of the car opened and another man, Clinton's accomplice, got in. The two kidnappers then drove Alison towards a forested area about 3 to 4 kilometers away from the city. The car ventured deeper into the dense forest until it came to a halt. Clinton and his accomplice got out of the car and pulled Alison out as well. It was late at night, and the darkness made it difficult to see anything clearly. At this point, the two kidnappers informed Alison of their intention to rape her. Realizing the dire situation and understanding that resistance could lead to her death, Allison made the difficult decision to comply in hopes of staying alive. She told them she wouldn't resist, though it was a heart-wrenching choice driven by survival. The men then forced Allison to her knees, and Clinton, the first man who had taken her, began to assault her. This torment continued for a long time. Afterward, Clinton made Allison stand and commanded her to undress herself, which she did under duress. Once she was stripped, Clinton raped her repeatedly. When he was satisfied, he got dressed and told his accomplice it was his turn. The second man then proceeded to assault Allison in the same brutal manner. By the time both men had finished, Allison had been subjected to horrific abuse and was left in an unconscious state, barely clinging to her senses. Allison had sustained severe internal injuries from the violent attack. The two men, knowing they couldn't leave her alive to identify them, decided to ensure her death. Clinton grabbed Allison by the throat, squeezing until he believed she had stopped breathing. However, his accomplice wasn't convinced that Allison was dead. Taking a knife from his pocket, he began stabbing her in the stomach repeatedly, delivering at least 30 vicious blows. The brutal assault didn't end there. The same knife was then thrust into Allison's private parts 8 to 9 times with great force, causing further grievous injuries. Blood flowed freely, and Allison's intestines began to protrude from the numerous stab wounds in her abdomen. Yet the men, driven by a cruel paranoia that Allison might still be alive, continued their assault. Satisfied that their savage efforts had ensured her death, the two men left Allison's battered body in the forest, believing they had silenced her forever. To confirm Allison's death, both men took turns stabbing her neck, delivering about 17 blows from different angles. Blood gushed from Allison's body, and she was by now completely unconscious, unable to comprehend the extent of her injuries. The men, satisfied with their gruesome handiwork, reassured each other that no one could survive such an ordeal. They believed Allison was dead and could no longer pose a threat to them by identifying them. However, before leaving, the second man, who had an obsessive and sadistic fascination with inflicting pain on women's private parts, picked up the knife again. Driven by his twisted pleasure, he resumed stabbing Allison's private parts with even more brutality. This continued assault was marked by a disturbing eagerness to cause maximum harm. With Allison lying motionless and severely wounded, the two men finally left her in the forest, convinced she was dead. They believed their actions had silenced her forever, leaving no witness to their horrific crimes. After the brutal attack, the two men left, leaving Allison for dead. They threw her clothes into the jungle from the car before driving away, leaving Allison lying naked and severely injured. Despite losing a significant amount of blood and enduring unimaginable trauma, Allison was miraculously still alive. As Allison regained consciousness, she gradually became aware of her surroundings and the horrifying ordeal she had endured. She remembered being assaulted and raped by the two men. When she attempted to move, she realized the extent of her injuries, that her body was in agony, and she struggled to move her head, only to discover that most of the nerves and bones in her neck had been severed. Pieces of flesh and nerves were hanging from her neck, a gruesome reminder of the vicious attack. Allison's shock deepened as she explored further, touched her stomach, and was horrified to feel her internal organs, including her intestines and liver, protruding from her abdomen. Despite the overwhelming pain and disbelief, Allison was determined to survive. As Allison continued to explore her injuries, she discovered that several organs had also protruded from private parts, adding to her agony. Despite realizing the severity of her injuries and the slim chances of survival, Allison began to write in the soil beside her. She painstakingly inscribed the names of her attackers' friends and tians, hoping that if her body was discovered by the police, they would be able to bring her assailants to justice. Allison knew that her chances of survival were slim, and she lay there, waiting for death to claim her. The pain and horror of her ordeal were unimaginable, and only she could truly comprehend the depths of her suffering. Despite the odds, Allison clung to life, determined to seek justice for the heinous crimes committed against her. After lying there for about 20 to 25 minutes, Allison summoned an incredible amount of willpower. She decided that if she could somehow make it back to the road she had come from, there might be a chance that someone passing by could help her. However, the pain was excruciating, and even the slightest movement caused her agony. Despite this, Allison was determined to try. Attempted to crawl and drag herself towards the road. It was a daunting task, and she struggled immensely. At first, she tried to move backward using her hands, but the road was still 300 to 400 meters away. Exhausted and in pain, Allison almost gave up, but then she gathered her strength and resolved to stand up, realizing that it was her only chance at survival. However, as she attempted to stand, she quickly realized that her injuries were too severe. Despite her nearly fatal injuries, Allison summoned all her remaining strength to stand up, using a tree for support. However, when she managed to stand, she realized the extent of her injuries. Her head hung back, her hair touching her waist, as if her head was only held up by a few nerves. Allison's air pipe was broken, making it impossible for her to make any sound. With sheer determination, Allison placed her hand on the back of her head and used her other hand to support her neck, dragging herself forward by grabbing onto trees. In this agonizing state, naked in the darkness of the night, Allison began to make her way toward the highway from where she remembered the car had entered the forest. Along the way, she spotted her denim shirt lying on the ground. Despite the pain, she picked it up and used it to support her head as she continued her harrowing journey towards the highway. Despite the horrifying state of her body, Allison refused to give up. She gathered her intestines, liver, and stomach inside her denim shirt, tucking them back into her abdomen as best as she could. With immense strength and willpower, she managed to hold her organs in place and continued walking, using the shirt to support her stomach. As she moved forward, Allison realized she was not breathing through her nose or mouth. She later understood that her windpipe had been pressed and stuck together by her attackers in an attempt to kill her. However, when they stabbed her neck multiple times, her windpipe was severed, allowing her to breathe through the wound in her neck. This gruesome turn of events was a grim testament to Allison's resilience and sheer determination to survive. As Allison struggled to reach the road, her survival instincts kicked in. Her windpipe, previously stuck together, had opened up, allowing her to breathe through the wound in her neck. She managed to make it to the road, but the effort was excruciatingly difficult. Her vision was fading in and out, alternating between seeing everything black and catching glimpses of passing vehicles. When Allison finally reached the road, she collapsed, unable to muster the strength to stand. Desperate for help, she tried to flag down passing vehicles. One vehicle eventually stopped, and a person stepped out to investigate. However, upon seeing Allison lying naked and injured, the person was too frightened to approach her and remained inside the vehicle. The man who stopped his vehicle only to speed away upon seeing Allison lying naked, injured on the road cannot be blamed. Unfortunately, there are instances where people feign distress to lure unsuspecting individuals into traps for robbery or other criminal activities. It's possible the man feared he was being set up and chose to drive off to protect himself. Allison lay on the road for over 45 minutes, desperately trying to flag down passing vehicles for help. Despite being ignored, she found the courage to stand again, using her shirt to support her injured stomach. As she stood in the road, a car approached and she waved her elbow to catch the driver's attention. The driver, upon seeing Allison's condition, may have been startled, perhaps even mistaking her for a zombie due to her disheveled appearance. However, he stopped his car a few meters ahead and cautiously observed her for nearly 2 minutes, trying to ascertain if she was genuinely in need of help. Convinced of her distress, the driver, named Dean Alert, got out of his car and approached Allison, asking her what had happened and who had harmed her. Dean was the first to come to Allison's aid and assist her. Dean approached Allison and quickly realized the severity of her condition. Being a medical student, Dean understood the gravity of Allison's injuries. She immediately covered Allison with a cloth and, with the help of friends, carefully placed her in the car to transport her to the nearest hospital. However, in 1994, mobile phones were a luxury, and despite having one in the car, the emergency services were not immediately accessible. When they finally reached the emergency services, they were told to wait, and assistance arrived 32 hours later. Dean was determined to keep Allison alive until help arrived. Allison's condition was critical, and her thyroid had protruded from her throat, a sight that shocked Dean. Without hesitation, Dean gently placed the thyroid back into Allison's throat, a grim reminder of the severity of her injuries. When the emergency services arrived, they seemed disinterested in the necessary formalities to save Allison. She was placed on a stretcher and loaded into the ambulance. Unfortunately, the ambulance driver seemed incompetent or indifferent, not driving urgently despite the siren. The journey to the hospital, which should have been swift, took about 3/4 of an hour. Upon arrival, Allison was swiftly transferred to the operating theater where the medical team awaited her. The doctors were stunned by Allison's condition, with some leaving the operation theater in shock. Despite years of experience, they had never encountered such severe injuries. Allison's intestines were not only cut, but pieces of them had lodged inside her stomach, requiring careful removal during surgery. Moreover, her prolonged exposure to the elements had filled her wounds with soil, leaves, and other debris, posing a serious risk of infection. Dr. Dimitri, one of the treating physicians, expressed disbelief at Allison's survival after such extensive trauma. The medical team worked tirelessly to clean her wounds and repair the damage, facing a challenging and unprecedented case. Despite the severity of her injuries, Allison miraculously survived the surgery, much to the doctors' surprise. They found that her throat had been severely damaged, with only a few veins keeping her alive. Additionally, her thyroid had been cut in two, a usually fatal injury. However, against all odds, Allison survived. The doctors meticulously cleaned and repaired her wounds, ensuring that no further infection could set in. After 3.5 hours of surgery, Allison was out of immediate danger. However, due to the extent of her injuries, the doctors informed her that she would never be able to conceive as her uterus had been removed. It's truly remarkable how Allison survived such extensive injuries. The doctors themselves were astounded at her resilience and recovery. Despite being stabbed over 50 to 60 times, including 17 times in the neck, more than 30 times in the stomach, and numerous other injuries, Allison pulled through. After regaining consciousness, Allison bravely recounted the harrowing ordeal to the police, providing them with crucial information about her attackers. Survival can indeed be seen as nothing short of a miracle, defying the odds and showing incredible strength in the face of unimaginable trauma. The police wasted no time in investigating Allison's claims. They swiftly gathered photos of known criminals and brought them to Allison for identification. Among the photos, Allison identified Franz and Thiens as her attackers, confirming her account. The fact that both men were already known to the police as repeat offenders added weight to Allison's testimony. The police were astounded by the callousness of the criminals. Clinton, who had initially encountered Allison, admitted to the crime and even returned Allison's ring, stained with her blood, to the police. He seemed resigned to the fact that Allison had survived their brutal attack. Both Franz and Thiens were then questioned separately by the police. It was clear that they had not anticipated Allison's survival, as evidenced by their actions of keeping her ring as a memento of their crime. The police now had solid evidence and confessions linking the two men to Allison's horrific ordeal. They confessed to their crime, admitting, yes, we have done all this to Allison, and we are ready to bear whatever punishment there is for it. Both of them accepted their crime very calmly, because they knew that the public was angry. If they stayed outside, the public would not leave them. At least they are alive inside the jail, so the police will soon take both of them to court to present them. As soon as the judge heard their statements and the details of the case, his eyes widened. Both of them were immediately sentenced to life imprisonment in the first trial. They were going to rot in jail until their last breath. However, recently news came out that both of them granted parole. They are now out of jail, all without Allison knowing that she is still alive. Allison has since become a motivational speaker, traveling from place to place, sharing her story of survival. She tells people what happened to her and how she managed to save herself. The purpose is to motivate others. If people see someone who did everything to stay alive, they can find inspiration in it. The accused had already been granted parole by the court, and they came out after 28 years. This incident was a horrific one that happened to Allison Botha. Even today, people in South Africa know this incident by the name of Nod Hook Ripper Rapist. And that is it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next video. Till then, take care.